So I've always been a big history fan, particularly military history. If we'd only had some classes in military history, I would have paid more attention in school. But courses in military history just don't fit with the kind of the reigning feminist ideology for elementary and high school education. So a year or two ago, I read Stolfi's book, Hitler's Panzers East, which had the thesis that Germany would have won World War II if it had only driven on Moscow in July of 1941. And so I found that interesting. Never really considered that. And then I read Stolfi's biography of Hitler, which had a lot of perspectives that I never thought about. Now I'm reading a more conventional history of Operation Barbarossa, which was the German invasion of Soviet Union, launched in June of 1941. This is by David Stahel, who's an Australian. And it's the most highly regarded book on Operation Barbarossa that's available on Amazon.com. It's got about 70 reviews with like an average of at least 4 stars. Come on, man, get out of my lane. What a jerk. So Stahel says his book came out in 2009, and he says there never was any chance for Germany to defeat the Soviet Union because Germany simply logistically could not match up. So in 1941, Soviet Union, at the start of the war with Germany, had an army of 3.5 million. By August of 1941, had an army of 6.5 million. And by the end of the year, they had an army of 8 million. So Germany just could not compete. They just had no reserves of manpower. Like, they went in with 3 million, and that was about all they had available, and they were never going to be able to replenish that. Yeah, so according to Stahel, Germany only had the logistics to penetrate 500 kilometers of Russia. So comment in the chat that Germany could only penetrate about 600 miles of Russia with logistics. Russia was so big that Goebbels, the propaganda minister, he would not publish any maps of Russia once the invasion got underway, because just seeing the enormous size of the Soviet Union would be way too discouraging. And I think that's hilarious. He would not allow publication of maps of Russia. And so there's an excellent thread on Gregory Cochrane's website, and he's a physicist and anthropologist with a tremendous interest in military history, and he did a thread like, were there any possibilities that the Axis powers could have won World War II? And he had a hard time with thinking of any possibilities, but he did outline one that, I think in October or November of 1941, Stalin and his regime had made plans to leave Moscow, to flee from Moscow. And all the plans were in place to flee. And then just the last minute, after Stalin got assurances from Zhukov that the Germans would not reach Moscow, only then did Stalin cancel plans for his regime, his government, to leave Moscow. So if Stalin had fled Moscow in October of 41, that could have been very debilitating for the Soviets' psychology, and also all the main train lines in the Soviet Union ran through Moscow. Moscow is very heart of the country, so if you took out Moscow, you captured Moscow, you severely limited the ability of the Soviet Union to transport its armies back and forth across its rail network, because its rail network all went through Moscow. Stahel's got a lot of interesting stuff. So conventional history, according to Stahel, generally puts the defeat of Operation Barbarossa in say November of 1941, that was the turning point. And some historians even put it the Battle of Kursk in July of 1943, that was the turning point. Well, the turning point was in the first month. That in the first month of that war, the Germans simply outran their logistics, and it wasn't the Soviet army that defeated the Germans. It wasn't even the Soviet weather. It was simply that Germany did not have the logistics to take on the Soviet Union. For example, Germany was severely short on rubber, and so within a couple of weeks of the war, panzer divisions couldn't get replacement tires. They were running low or running short on ammunition and fuel, and most of their tanks were simply no match for the heavier Russian tanks. And so according to David Stahel, Germany just never had the logistics, the material, the ammunition, the tanks, the aircraft, the guns, but most particularly never had the stuff required for such an enormous endeavor. And so it wasn't a matter of tactics, it was a matter of logistics. It wasn't even a matter of strategy. It was a matter of logistics. So the German generals, by and large, all wanted to march on Moscow in July of 1941, and Hitler was strongly opposed to this. For Hitler, his main goal was destroying the Soviet armies, and he didn't really care about taking Moscow. The German generals thought that the capture of Moscow would yield such a devastating psychological blow to the Soviet Union that they would sue for peace, and Stalin would be overthrown. He wouldn't be able to attract sufficient support from the Soviet people. So on day two of the German invasion of the Soviet Union, they were surprised at how hard the Russians fought. They were surprised by their courage. And so on day one, essentially, the Germans found out that this invasion was going to be a lot more difficult than what they expected. And apparently Hitler had tremendous anxiety about the invasion in the weeks leading up to it. The German general staff were all completely confident of victory. And it wasn't just the German staff. The American military, the British military, all expected the Soviet Union to be defeated within 4 to 6 weeks by the Germans. So it wasn't just Germany overestimated their own capabilities. America and Britain also expected the German army to soundly thrash the Soviets. And remember, the Germans had essentially done that in World War I while devoting the bulk of their forces to the Western Front. So in World War I, the Germans made very short work of the Russian army, and Russia had to sue for peace. And so Germany had reason to believe that it would win. So in World War I, Germans just destroyed the Russians, and the Russians had to sue for a very disadvantageous peace. And in both World War I and World War II, Germany had to win a quick war because its opponents had superior logistics, had more people, more material on their side. So Germany came close to winning World War I, and apparently came close to winning World War II. I guess that's a matter of debate. But their only hope in both world wars was to win a quick war. And also in both World War wars, whenever Germany was evenly matched against its opponent, they always won. Like, soldier for soldier, Germans were the superior fighting force. It was only when they were facing considerable odds against them that they lost. So in Operation Barbarossa, the Germans on being outnumbered by the Soviets 3-1. Okay, it was not uncommon for Germany to go on the offensive, seize ground, win battles while being outnumbered 3-1. And I mean, that's unheard of. Normally in military tactics, you don't go on the offensive unless you outnumber the defenders by at least 3-1. But for the Germans, they were winning offensive wars while outnumbered 3-1, which is just incredible. But in the end, they did not have the stuff. They could not supply fuel. They didn't have enough fuel, didn't have enough rubber, didn't have enough tanks, didn't have enough guns, didn't have enough ammunition, didn't have enough men, soldiers in the army. They simply just didn't have enough equipment and material and fuel, and that's what defeated them. It wasn't the Soviet Red Army, it wasn't bad tactics, it wasn't bad strategy. They just didn't have the stuff. So there's been a school of thought that the Soviet Union was preparing to invade Germany and Western Europe, and that's why Hitler went on the offensive in 41 to kind of preclude the Soviet supposed offensive into Germany. I asked Gregory Cochrane about that, and he was not persuaded. He said that Stalin always showed himself very, very cautious operator, that it was very unlikely that Stalin would have initiated a war with Germany, let alone to try to take over Europe. So I interviewed Gregory Cochrane about 4 months ago. So you can find that on my channel. I asked him large number of questions about World War II. He said that the one possible way Germany could have won Operation Barbarossa was to use nerve gas, sarin. And Germany thought the Soviet Union had large quantities of nerve gas, so that's why they didn't use it apparently. But if Germany had just used this on Moscow and other Soviet cities and dropped it over Soviet armies, that's possibly one way that the Soviet Union could have won the war. So Japan was watching very closely what was going on with Operation Barbarossa, and they saw within a few weeks that Germany was finding it much more difficult than Germany anticipated, and so Japan therefore did not attack the Soviet Union from the Soviets' Eastern Front, which would have held down a large number of Soviet forces. But because Japan did not attack, because Germany and Japan did not coordinate Operation Barbarossa, Soviet Union was able to pull its forces out of the Eastern Front. and bring them to combat Germany. They didn't have to worry about Japan attacking. And Soviets had thrashed Japan in a war. I think it was in the 1930s. And so that Japan wanted no part of fighting Russia again. So I guess this also points to the Soviets entered the industrial age with great brutality, but also great effectiveness. Let's suppose that Stalin had been one half as brutal as he was. Would the Soviet Union then have been able to win its war with Germany? It was the brutality that Stalin used that perhaps in large part that was necessary to get the Soviet Union into the industrial age, get them to industrialize and produce such highly effective weaponry. They had better tanks, better artillery and than the Germans. And so Soviet munition strength shocked a lot of people, and Soviet industrial strength shocked a lot of people. So undoubtedly Stalin was brutal in his methods, but he dragged this backwards country in the course of 10 years. He forcibly industrialized the Soviet Union so that they could fight off the great fighting force that had yet been seen by mankind, the German army. And nobody outside the Soviet Union, it seems, realized their enormous industrial strength and competence. They were great at designing and manufacturing weapons that were very important in winning the war. And so people in the West just did not expect the Soviets to achieve this degree of competence. I'm trying to think what else jumps out at me from this David Stahel book. That all the German generals wanted to march on Moscow. Hitler didn't care about that. He just wanted to wipe out the Soviet Red Army, encircle and destroy. It's striking how much conflict there was in the German armed forces, that all the generals, it seemed like, were fighting with each other, fighting with headquarters, which in turn was fighting with Hitler. Hitler had a very dim view of his generals, didn't like his generals, and his generals, by and large, did not effectively stand up to him. I read von Manstein's memoir. So von Manstein was Hitler's greatest general, and he said that Hitler was a very poor strategic thinker. So von Manstein said that Germany should have invaded England in 1940, because even if Germany lost that battle, okay, that would not have been devastating for Germany. That they just would have lost the battle. If they won and successfully conquered England, then there's no way the United States ever would have mounted an invasion to take back England from across the Atlantic Ocean. Just not feasible. So von Manstein saw an invasion of England in 1940 as having the possibility of ending World War II, that Germany would then have been impregnable, would have created a fortress Europe, and by allowing England to survive as an independent power, that would threaten Germany's hold on Europe. So that was interesting. Von Manstein also was highly critical of the German army command structure, that effectively the the bureaucrats at the top did not have Hitler's confidence, and Hitler would constantly countermand them. So the operation of the army was chaotic. But as the Operation Barbarossa went along, Hitler took increasing control of military decisions, and he simply didn't have the training. He simply wasn't competent at that, and that was a disaster. So someone like von Manstein had been placed in charge of German armed forces. Germany would have been a much more formidable fighting force, much more coherent, would have provided like a unified structure so that the various parts of the German war machine were working together instead of all these feuds between the Luftwaffe and the SS and the army and varying generals going at each other. Okay, some random thoughts. Bye-bye.